Oh, is this
now.
going live everywhere?
Yes, everywhere across the whole webs.
The web verse.
Yes.
All right. There we go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Pivot Ready Live. We've got Amy, Wesley, and myself, Dirk Van Reenen, joining you guys today. And today we're going to be talking about what language are you using in your company? You know, what how are the words that you are using influencing your culture, influencing the way that people think, influencing the way people feel? Um, I'm the founder and CEO of Bergflow. Amy runs operations for Bergflow, and Wesley is on the servicing side of Bergflow. So, um, Bergflow is a company. If you guys don't quite know what Bergflow is, it's a company that works with service-based companies out there. We specialize in helping to structure and build teams for companies, helping to hire really amazing people, teaching them how to work together, be productive together, and go after big goals together. So. We've been doing this about 5 years now, and we just recently started this Pivot Ready Live, where we're just kind of coming up and having discussions as a team, and want to invite you guys into the conversation. So there's a comment section wherever you guys are coming from. If you're on maybe Facebook or LinkedIn, wherever you are, would love for you guys to chime in, ask any questions, add your perspective, add your thoughts around these things. But we're going to be spending what about 30 minutes here, 40 minutes, something like that. So yeah. So Amy, over to you. What are your thoughts about setting up the this call, like language, culture, the words you use?
Well, I think my thought it was kind of derived from a conversation we've had with a client recently, and also in combination with something I was reading the other day, and it was we have a culture in our company, and the question oftentimes is your culture intentional or is it unintentional? And do you know what your culture is? And so I was thinking about that, and where my brain kind of led me was what is the smallest thing that makes the biggest impact on your culture? Um, Ultimately, I think your culture makes the biggest impact on your team. And so, what is the smallest common denominator amongst those two things? And it kind of led me to what words and what language you're speaking, and how the language you're speaking is making people feel, react. Um, yeah, so that's kind of just the thought behind where the conversation came from.
Mhm.
So a couple of questions, and I'll just shoot the questions off to you guys, and then you guys can feel free to answer them. However, is um, how do you, to start with, like how does the culture of your company affect your team and building your team?
Well, I think one of the interesting things about culture is I think some people say that, oh, like we don't really have culture in our company, like we want culture, and it's like, no, the culture is already there. Like culture is already there. Culture is the way that people interact, the expectations around who you are, the the, the kind of realness or aliveness of your mission and vision of your company. It's the atmosphere, it's the belief systems, it's everything about who you are, how you interact, how you do things, how you treat each other. That's the culture. So it's not that some companies have culture and some companies don't have culture. All companies have culture, right? Some companies just have very purposeful culture that's defined, that they really work on the culture, and really are just adamant about protecting the culture, designing the culture. And then there's some companies that they just don't care. It's like a byproduct, right? It's just a result of the way that things are, or who the owner is, or whatever the case may be. So I think the first thing to realize is that culture is already there. So the question does become exactly what you said, is like, look, are you aware of what the culture is in your company? And I think that sometimes that's going to vary too, between, obviously we work with primarily service based companies, right? So sometimes the culture that the owner thinks may be there could be very different from what the culture is like boots to the ground, right? So I mean, like we've got a client that has maybe coming up on about 100 people now, and they've got people that are like boots to the ground linemen, right? That they work out and they work out in the hot and in the cold and stuff like that. And like there's sometimes there could be like a separation between like, what the C team in the office think the culture of the company is versus like what the boots to the ground people think that the culture is. And I've seen that in other companies too. They grow to a certain point, right? Meaning that, is the culture different? I mean, I always think that the between the different divisions, different levels, it's always going to be a little bit different, but the culture shouldn't be so different that it feels like a different company on one level than another. It still has to be the same company, and maybe there's a little bit of a different culture between the people that work in the office and the people that work, boots to the ground. But I mean, it's one of those things that if it's so different that it can't agree with each other, then you got a really a major problem, right? So I think it's one of those things. The first things, you have to start thinking about, what is my culture, and the culture that if I'm looking at it from like the CEO viewpoint, is the culture that's in my head actually the culture that exists within the company? And I think a lot of times there is a variation in that. I could think that everything's great, we're this great team and all this kind of stuff, but then there could be situations where like, oh, we're just on the same page, we're not communicating well, there's no priorities, things are always changing. And so like from the team's perspective, it's like, man, the culture is very different than what I thought it was. So I think it's a big part that you have to think about it. You have to interpret, and I think you have to talk to other people about it. Right? You got to talk to your team and say like, hey, what are you guys feeling about the culture right now? And you don't have to kind of just say like, what's your thought about the culture? You could say things like, hey, what's really exciting you right now? What are you most excited about? What are you energized by? Hey, what are some of the things that are frustrating you right now? Like what do you think's holding us up? What's holding you up? And in those kind of conversations, the cultural aspects will start emerging. So I think it is one of those things that you have to be purposeful about. You have to have conversations about, and you have to use inquiry to kind of find out what it actually is.
So just on that, Dirk, how do you feel people influence culture through conversation? Obviously, there's the existing culture that people might not be aware of on how the culture exists. But the question is, how do we influence culture without saying, "Hey, I just want it done my way"? It's my company. I want it done my way. How do we create a collaborative culture where you introduce the voices of other people?
Yeah, so I mean, I think one thing is that, I mean, if you want collaborative culture, you have to make sure that people's voices matter. Because if people's voices don't matter, and in many cases, if people's voices don't matter equally, then you're not going to have collaboration. You're going to have a dictatorship in a company. So I do think it's one of these things. I went through appreciative design training several years ago with Exchange, and really learned how to have more facilitative type conversations, trainings, designing. And I think it's a cool way to bring different perspectives in, different ideas, different voices, and it matters, right? Because when you have a CEO and a janitor, and I mean, like we've done this for companies now, where on a small scale it's maybe 10 people. I mean, we've done it in rooms of 300 people, bringing them together at one time to do design sessions. And I mean, when you can have a CEO sitting next to a janitor, and both their voices matter equally when they're looking at something and giving their input, and it's not like, oh, the CEO's voice matters so much more than the janitor's, but in that moment, in that design and in that facilitation, both voices matter equally. Sorry, I'm going like on the fourth hour of straight meetings here. I mean, talk a lot. So I think it is, you have to draw people's authentic voice in, and for me, the foundation of that is trust. That if there's not authentic trust in the company, and it's not the kind of trust like, hey, is somebody going to show up for work? It's kind of trust that if I say something, if I bring an idea, I'm not going to be made wrong for that idea. I'm not going to be held hostage to that idea. I'm not going to, it's not going to be something that's going to be held over my head later on in the company because I had this idea or I brought this in. It's just like, hey, it's a perspective. I'm honored for it, even if it's a little bit off the wall. Because sometimes what you find is like some of the most off the wall, out of the box kind of ideas are the ones that maybe you don't fully go with that idea, but maybe that one idea shifts the entire thinking 5%, and that's what you needed to really move the company forward. So there's got to be trust. You got to bring everybody's voice in, and there's got to be a sense of, hey, we're here to work together to move something forward. I mean, for me, that's the basis of collaboration, is that there's a win for all of us in this. It's not just a win for me as a CEO, the owner of the company. It's that all of us are going to win if we can move this forward.
So just picking up on that, I mean, I spoke a little bit earlier today about priming conversations, and how to use people's profiles. So everybody has a unique communication style or a unique way of communicating. They have a preferred way, how their brain is wired. Oftentimes, I've come across business owners that communicate in their style, and they only deliver in their style without showing any cognizance of how people experience or receive that information. So is there a way for us to dive into that? Is that something that you feel is important, or do we just say, hey, we send out a blanket email? I'm a analytical person, therefore I'm just going to send an analytical email to everybody in the company, and I expect you to respond accordingly.
There, it may help if I'm unmute. I think it depends on how many people are addressed, how well they know each other, um, what the expectation is. I mean, it's there's some people like on our team that if I were to send them an email, I write the email and then I have to go back and say, oh, hey, how are you? Good morning. How was your weekend? And then there's other people like Amy that I can just like, I don't even have to say hello or anything like that. I'm just like, blah, 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 and Amy can write back and she goes, blah, blah, blah. It's just like, it's very like just what it is. It's matter of fact. It's getting it done. It's not, there's no chit chat or anything like that. And I think, we're very comfortable in that kind of communication because like, if Amy just kind of spurts something at me, I'm not like Amy's mad at me or Amy's upset with me. I'm just like, Amy's getting shit done. It's just kind of, this is how we communicate. We don't have to worry about niceties or anything like that, right? Other people, I gotta like really kind of soften it up and kind of round it out a little bit at the end and stuff like that. And it depends on the relationship, right? I mean, I think if you're communicating one to many, you probably want to go with the most kind of holistic type approach. You don't want to just kind of be short, and especially if people don't know you, right? If you guys don't know me, you may think that if I kind of send you an email that like, oh, Dirk's upset about something or he's mad or is like, and it's like, or this has to get done right now, or versus like, oh, this is just something that we need to be mindful of to get put on the project management board or whatever the case may be, right? So I think it depends on how many people you're communicating to, how well you know each other, how well you know the people that you're sending to, how well they know you. Obviously, that's something that we work on a lot with, behavioral assessments, is really understanding each other, behavioral preferred styles. But again, if I'm communicating one to many, I'm probably going with a little bit softer approach, trying to make it as simple and straightforward. I mean, I sent an email out 2 weeks ago to our Maris team, about the month of August coming up, and some really, I mean, it was a long email, right? So, but I mean, there was definitely some softening in the front start of the email, like, hey, we can do this. This is good. Or I'm excited about the things coming up. And like the last paragraph kind of like rounded out again. Um, Bullet pointed things, kind of explain things. And then we've had some additional conversations around it, right? And that's an example of more of like a one-to-many type communication. So I think you got to look at how many people you communicate with, how well do we know them, and what does that look like? Because I mean, for me, the people that are closest to me, I don't want to have to spend too much time with like niceties, right? And that doesn't mean that I'm not a nice guy. It doesn't mean that I'm like angry or anything like that. It just means like I value speed and efficiency. And if I gotta put an extra line in there every time we talk of like, hey, how are you going? Like, what's going on today? Like all that kind of stuff. Then for me, if I have to do that 3,000 times in a year, it takes too much time. It wastes time. So
It would be
for
very
me,
nice, just saying, but yeah,
what's that?
it would be very nice, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like in Wesley, like you like a little bit more the niceties and stuff like that, and it's usually like when we communicate. I mean, we're gonna have a little like side conversation about something or talk about something because it's like I want to be able to like build a relationship too, in that process. So it's all about knowing the people in the team and knowing the people that you work with. And the other thing too is, understanding people's challenge words, because like right now, um, you're helping one of our clients interview for a really high level position on their leadership team, right? And this company is, they're just a little over $3 million a year in revenue right now, and this one hire can probably open them up to go into multiple cities that can take them to $5 to $7 million in the next 2 years. I mean, they can over double their business in the next 18 months to 2 years, right? If they have the right hire. So we're actually stepping in and helping in that process. And one of the things that you said yesterday was like, oh, this person was using the word challenge a lot, and we like that because this person's going to be in a position where, if they don't like to be challenged, if they don't like to problem solve, if they don't like to be under pressure, things like that, they're probably not the right person, right? So even in the interviewing process, we're trying to understand, okay, what are the words that this person uses? Because in their position with the expectation of what they're going to do, we have to be able to link up these things and say, like, if this person's just everything they're talking about is like, oh, well, it's just, I want consensus. I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page, that everybody's always getting along. It's like, dude, you are not the right person for that position, right? I mean, we need somebody that's driven, that's going to take on challenges, that's going to make decisions, that's going to move things forward. Doesn't mean that they're not going to be a nice person or anything like that, but they're going to naturally be in an environment that they're going to have to deal with that. So I think that's part of the culture of a company too, is that, I mean, uh, I own a couple of different companies, and they're a little bit different. I mean, we got some companies that, like, Berkflow is a very fast paced, like hard pressure, hard driving, lots going on, small team, driving hard kind of thing. Other companies may be a little bit more laid back, where it's like, hey, the overall pace of conversation is a little bit slower, the pressure's not as much, the timeline's a little bit longer, like. So it depends on the company as well, and it is nice, just kind of having the dichotomy of us owning different companies and then working with so many companies, because it helps us see how things are differently, right? Because I mean, if you're only in one company and that company is your world, then you may start thinking like that's just what it is. You're not contrasting. Hey, is this a fast-paced company? Is this a high-pressure company? Is this a very detail-oriented or very big picture type company? Is this a super customer friendly type company, or is it more like a business to business cut and dry? So all of those things are important for you to understand and articulate as part of the culture, and it's going to affect how you communicate as well. It's like, I was on I was on a call. We talked about this. We were kind of talking to a new client, or a possible new client. Like, they have an extremely smart team, like extremely intelligent team, right? And I talked to the owner, and then I talked to one of their leaders, and they kind of set up this like group, and I was on this Zoom call with like 6 or 7 people, and I swear, dude, like in like 45 minutes, like nobody smiled, nobody showed emotion, like it was just like cut and dry, and it's just like, like we talked about it, and I was like, that did not go well, because I mean, that's not who we are. And I mean, we are like, we want to have fun, we want to show emotion and stuff like that. I mean, it'd probably be really hard for us to like work with a company like that very closely if they're just like, everybody's just like, nobody's smiling, nobody's this, like and it's just like, and that's probably part of their culture. It's just like, because of the kind of clients they work with and at the scale they work, like that's kind of more of who they are, but that's not really who we are. And I think like that's important too, is like, is understanding your culture, and like, are you matching up with the right kind of clients? Are you matching up with servicing the right kind of people? Because that's a huge part of it too, is like the clients you serve are a huge part of like the culture. And I mean, like, so that's one thing that we're so blessed in Berkflow, is that, I mean, we've got amazing clients that we have really good relationships with. We build deep relationships. I mean, we become friends with a lot of our clients, and I mean, it's just because we go so deep with relationships, we do fun stuff together, and I think all of that's part of the culture.
So, Amy, let me direct a question at you. As somebody, in a business, how do you feel communication is established around the culture of a business? Obviously, there's a very clear expectation from how the leader wants to show up and how the leader responds. But the other side of that cultural equation is, how does the team talk to one another? Because everybody in the team are different people, they operate and think differently. So what type of advice would you give people to say, hey, this is how you set the communication standard in your business that drives culture?
I think a large part of it, and Dirk mentioned a little bit that, we take the approach of an assessment, but it's just simply understanding the other people in your team. I mean, Wesley won't respond to me until I say good morning in the morning, and I tend to not say good morning. So, but it's one of those things that I've learned, and so like it's a mutual respect for me to say like, okay, sometimes I adapt to his way of communicating, or sometimes I adapt to somebody else's way of communicating, and sometimes they adapt to my way in certain situations as well. And so there's always a give and take in understanding how the other people on your team function. So it's not just the top down, but it's kind of the same concept as 360-degree leadership. Is it's 360-degree understanding and then adapting in certain situations according to that as well. And I also think one of the things that I was thinking about is like I come back to the example, and Dirk mentioned the word challenge earlier. Well, one of the things that we as a team have like an understanding that we don't use the word problem, we use the word challenge. And like I've seen conversations get interrupted because the wrong word was used. And so I think like that in and of itself creates the culture amongst the team to have a level of accountability and a level of trust built in, like we all have the same understanding of how we're approaching things as well.
Yeah, I mean that definitely, by instituting cultural language in your business, like we don't talk about problems, we talk about challenges. The first couple of times I had pushback in because it's in your norm. You say, hey, I've got this problem, let's solve it, because that's how your brain works. Problem equals a solution. And to view it as a challenge, so it changes the perspective that you have, and it also makes you part of the solution, as opposed to saying, hey, I'm coming to you with a problem. That means I don't have an answer, I don't have a contribution. So little things like that institutes collaboration. And I think people have to be very mindful of what type of vocabulary, what type of words they allow in their business. It's very easy to say, you know what, Dirk spoke about it in a call we were on earlier on, is we sometimes use the word always. Well, Amy never does this, or Amy always does this, and we categorize people under this blanket statement where realistically we have to say, okay, this is where Amy is right now, or this is the response, or this is the response I should be getting. It is out of character. Why is that? And I think that's what makes cohesion in a team through culture really strong. When you can start paying attention to things like that. So to Dirk's opening statement, culture is going to exist for the good or the bad. And whether you allow it to go off the rails is totally in your control.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too, because I mean, it's not just you obviously want to build an empowering vocabulary, right? And some people just don't think that it's that important, right? It's just like, oh, well, what does it matter? But it really does, because every time we use a word, every time we do things, it just does matter. Like, and that's I love the book Fierce Conversations by Susan Scott, right? Because she says, look, if you have a relationship with somebody, the relationship is nothing more than the sum of the conversations that have happened in the relationship, right? So if you really think about that, it's like the relationship that I have with you, Wesley, is nothing more than the conversations that we've had. You know what I mean? Like, we've had some really, really great conversations, since we've met, about everything, not just work. I mean, like anything that you can imagine, right? So it's like there's a strong base of like conversations that we've had that helps build the relationship, and um, and we've had examples of like me making a really, really, really bad hire last year, and somebody coming into our world that their level of conversations was gossip and griping and backstabbing, and I mean, within like a couple of months, I mean, it just created so much funkiness within multiple businesses that we have that are interlinked. And, just such an example of like one person can come in and just wreck your culture, right? And it's just like, and you made a good point the other day. You said, look, there was an aftermath of that person. It wasn't just like, once that person left, like it was just like snap back to good. It's like, I mean, it took some time for us to kind of, heal the culture a little bit of like bringing somebody like that in. And just such a great reminder that you got to really watch who you're going to be in business with, and how people show up, and what that looks like, because every conversation that happens within the business matters. Like every conversation on how you take something on, how you deal with a challenge, how you deal with an obstacle, how you deal with reward, or somebody doesn't do something right and you got to address it with them. Like every one of those conversations, the language you use, the way that you speak to them, the words you use, like they all matter, right? Because I mean, it's like one of these things. There, like in there's this lady in Keller Williams named Mo Anderson, right? And her nickname was the Velvet Hammer, because like she could really beat you up and you felt really good about it at the same time, right? And she just like had this like unique gift of being able to do that. And I was like, man, like that's so cool, because it's like I think I'm getting better at that, but I used to, like, when I beat it, when I had a tough conversation with somebody, they felt like hell afterwards, and they maybe felt like they should quit, or I was actually firing them. And today it's one of these things that I think I've gotten a lot better at it. I think I still got a lot to learn, but it's like, how do you have a great conversation with somebody where you can kind of beat them up a little bit and let them know that they messed up, but at the same time they feel loved for and they feel cared for, and they appreciate that you were able to have that level of care and candor with them. And I think it's a skill, and it's part of your culture too. It's like, when people mess up, they know they messed up. You don't have to go like pounce on them, but it's like the way it was taught to me was that, look, sometimes somebody messes up really bad, and like they don't need you to go and like pounce on them. They just need you to love on them. And then sometimes somebody does something really small, but you really need to drop the hammer on them, because they need to understand that even though that was something small they did, that it was out of culture, it was out of value, and it's not who we are as a company and as a team. So I think all of that, together is what the culture is. It's the relationship, it's the conversations, the words that we use. It's our overall approach to like, why are we here? Why are we doing these things? And I think it's one of the things that more and more people today want relationship in business. I think less and less people want it to be mechanical. I don't think it's that thing of like business over here, personal over here anymore. I think it's very integrated today in the way that most people show up. And I think people want to matter. I think that they want their voices to matter. I think that they want to know that their coworkers care about them, that their leaders care about them, and I think it's a worthy thing to strive for, to really push towards that as a leader. And I think it's hard for a lot of leaders, because I mean, like, there's a lot of people that came out of the like old school, like uh, kind of business rule book, where it's just like, it's like we don't talk about personal stuff at work. Like, you're here just to work. I don't care about what's going on in your life. I don't care about the drama you're having. It's like you're here to perform, and it's just like it's not that anymore today. It's so far from that. So I think it's one of those things that companies can really look, especially a lot of service companies can look at themselves and say like, hey, how can we actually increase the culture? How can we bring people's voice in? How can we help them, feel like they matter to the team? We care about them, and it's something you got to be purposeful about. It doesn't just happen. I think there's a lot of companies that I've seen that at a certain point they kind of hire like it's like a, I don't know, one of the companies we know, like they hired somebody called like the Unicorn of Happiness or something like that, and like this person's like sole job is to add like fun and joy and laughter into the company. It's like, and it was that important for them and their culture to have that person that's just like eternally happy, and their job is to spread happiness in the company. I was like, that's kind of a worthy thing. It's very unconventional, and they're spending money on that, but if they build an amazing culture and people are a little bit happier, more fulfilled at work, and they build a team of 100 or 200 people, it's probably going to pay massive dividends if they hired that person to do that. So yeah, I think it's a worthy cause to push towards that.
So an interesting thing, I was in a conversation with a business earlier this week, and the concept of winning being part of your culture came up, um, and I think a lot of times I see business owners, they miss the opportunity to celebrate wins, because if you don't know how to celebrate a win, you're not cultivating a culture of winning. Because if you're cultivating a culture of, well, we hear what's next, well, we got to this mile marker, what's next, then you're cultivating a culture of it's never good enough, or you know what, we're always on the road to perfection, or we're always on the road to the destination. And I was in the conversation with this business owner. very successful business. But this individual has built a business of dependency on the owner to be the problem solver. And that has become the culture. So effectively, the business owner does 80% of the hard labor. They pick up the slack for a lot of people not doing what they're supposed to do. And that culture has been bred into the business. Where they're out at a job site, they forgot something. Hey, I'm just going to phone Dirk. Hey, come and deliver this. I forgot to order this. Can you sort this out for me? And as much as, the language and the verbiage that you use influences the culture, particularly in business, not being able to celebrate wins or not being able to cultivate a culture of, what, I'm not here to solve your problems. I'm here to help you. I'm the guy. So often get blamed for overemphasizing it, but Gallup refers to business nowadays as, people work for companies because they want a coach. They don't want an employer. They don't want a boss. And specifically going into newer generations stepping into the work environment, it's more and more important for them to know that my direct leader, my supervisor, my manager also is the coach. They're also going to coach me. They're going to make me a better person. And again, for me, those are all things that forms part of culture. It's not just, hey, here's a single activity, or here's a single activity, or even to the point where you have an annual review. Because again, that culture created around an annual review is, I just need to coast, and then end of the year, I'll park the boss's car and make sure that I'm in the office early and dress nice for a week, and then the boss remembers me, and then I have my annual review, and then I coach for another 11 months. So those are all things that owners I've seen many times allow that culture to exist. And then they look at their business and they're like, we're just not performing. The business is just not moving. The needle's not moving. And they look at their talent bench in their business and they're like, I'm not even getting half of what I'm paying for.
Yeah, I think there's definitely kind of a calling that people want development, they want career advancement, they just want more emphasis on their personal development, while being in the work world. Like people, I think less and less, and like very few people probably today just go to work to like, hey, I go to work, I get my paycheck, but I do a good job, right? It's like either like, hey, I'm going to work to get a paycheck and I don't care about doing a good job, or hey, I'm going to work and the paycheck's there, but like what I really care about is like, am I being poured into? Am I being developed? Or am I being unlocked for future opportunities? Like, that's kind of where a lot of it is. So I think you have to look at the who your company is, what your culture is, and how is that showing up today. And again, I think that the big thing is just you got to be purposeful about it. So, all right,
Paul, I
any kind of
think
parting
too,
thoughts?
I think to that point that we spend the majority of our time around the people that we work with. And so it's it's you act, I mean, you are the summation of who influences you the most. And so the culture of work impacts the culture of your employees' lives all the way around. And so I think, again, if for me, it's like, it's not a top down thing. It's that, like, I want to impact the people I work with and I want to impact their lives, which then will impact their families' lives. And all of that should be better as well.
Yeah, so a parting thought from my side, Amy, just to back onto what you're saying, is I think there's contribution to the culture, which has to be intentful, and then there has to be the protection of the culture as well. You cannot allow the wolf in the door. So for me, that definitely is a two-sided sword. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would leave it with this, like, just see kind of how you can become aware of what the culture is. Like, if you're trying to figure out what is our culture, what kind of words are your team using? Like, what's the interaction like between your team? Are they talking about things that are worthy? Are they talking about things that are moving the company forward? Are they griping? Are they gossiping? That's a big part of it. Because I mean, if you hire somebody that's talented, that's kind of an A player that's coming in, that's looking for opportunity, and they step into your world, and people are griping and making excuses and being victims and gossiping, that person's going to leave, right? I mean, that kind of stuff repels the the people that identify as talent A players, like people that want to move things forward. So it's one of those things that you have to really be aware of. How are things showing up in your company? And like a lot of the companies that we work with, they have to make some significant changes in the first year to 2 years that we're working with them. And as those changes are made, I mean, we see companies doubling, tripling, quadrupling in 2 to 4 years from where they were when they were kind of getting stuck. And it's because they think differently, they use different language. I mean, in our company, we've got a whole kind of set of language that creates our own language, and it's almost like, we've got a glossary that says like, hey, like this is what this word means, right? I mean, it's kind of like, and a lot of our clients start adopting that kind of language, and they start using certain things because it's like it's part of like the new culture that they're building, and you got to see who's on board with that versus who's digging their heels and fighting that. But it's definitely part of driving the culture forward, using the language. So yeah, Amy, anything before we wrap? Any announcements? We're gonna be in Nashville next week at a big conference.
At the huge conference.
Yep. Jake says, what are the top terms to avoid in your business? What a great, we don't talk about problems, right? But top terms, what would you guys think about that? That's a great question. What do you avoid?
I have a couple of other ones written down here. One of them is employee versus the word team.
That's right. So we don't use the word employee. We only use team member, right? So that's one. We also don't use like, I don't like the word boss. Like I don't think like that's a good word. So we avoid the word boss. It's like,
this
I don't
is
know.
a
I
really
don't like the
little
one like
one.
I can't or we can't. I don't like that one.
So for me to answer Jake's question, I would say anything that can be perceived as a negative. A problem is a negative, a challenge is an opportunity. A boss is an immediately established hierarchy. If you talk about an employer, it means that you're just a number. So you need to be able to attach a positive emotional connection to the term. And if you can't, you have to rethink the verbiage that you're allowing in your business. So
Well, and I think even on top of that, sometimes it's like another one that I had written down, which is really little, but we don't talk about job titles almost ever. We talk about job roles and responsibilities a lot. And so, and that is just like, to me, like a title gives you kind of what you were saying, like a hierarchy of importance, but a role is like I'm part of the team and I'm pulling my weight kind of thing. So
Yep. All right, guys,
all
I
right,
gotta
well,
run.
Dirk
You
is
guys are welcome to stay
kicking
on.
out.
Yeah, got
All right.
a CEO to coach. Jake, thanks for joining us, man. Great question. That is one to kind of consider. Like, what are the yeses and nos, right? One word that I don't like, and I used to have a dollar jar for this. So if somebody said it, they would have to pay $1. Is when somebody says, "Do what?" Like when you say something and they're like, "Do what?" It drives me crazy. It's one of my pet peeves. So, yeah, don't say
On
"do
that
what."
note,
yeah, that's why I've learned you reposition it and say, okay, so what I'm hearing you say is,
Yeah. Like if you say like, "Hey, I need you to like do this thing," and they're like, "Okay, like what do you want me to do?" That's a little bit different. But if you're like, "Oh, like look over there," and you're like, "Do what?" It's like, no, don't say that word. That's a no-no.
yeah.
All right, I gotta bounce, guys. Amy, thanks so much for setting us up, and we'll be back next Tuesday. Thank you.
Yep. All right. Well, Wesley, do you have any other thoughts to end on?
no, we'll just encourage you guys. For those who want to come meet us at Huge, we're going to be at the Huge conference next week. You can always also check us out at brokeflow.com. We'd love to connect with you guys. Reach out to us, have a conversation. We also have obviously a Facebook page. We like being in conversations with like-minded people. So yeah, we'd welcome you guys reaching out.
Yeah, and we will be coming back next Tuesday, still about 2:15 again to go live. So if you have any topics you'd like us to discuss or anything like that, let us know. And then also watch social media next week. I might be giving a little bit of sneak peeks of Dirk and Wesley's headlining talks that they're doing. So,
All right, there we go. Thanks for joining us.